Welcome into Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Strange, joined by ESPN Houston's Joel Blank. Joel, welcome in. One of the more interesting developments of this early offseason for the Rockets are the reports that the Sixers have interest in Mike D'Antoni, but their interest involves a belief that he can lure James Harden with him. So there's a lot to unpack there, and so let me ask you first, why would Philly believe D'Antoni could lure Harden to the Sixers when Harden either didn't or couldn't convince Houston to extend Mike here?
Well, because here's the thing, Brandon. Externally, from just the casual Rockets or NBA fan, you look at it and say, well, those two guys really had a good chemistry. They hooked their wagon to each other. They made a good run. And so, therefore, to play small ball, D'Antoni was the one that turned the keys over to James, made him a point guard in title alone, and the offense just flourished because of it. So they think, hey, well, there's the tandem that we need in an Eastern Conference that's going to be kind of watered down with the exception of the top 2 or 3 teams, to where they could make a mark and go farther and do more than they've done with underachieving Joel Embiid and 25-letter alphabet Ben Simmons with no J in it, and they could rebuild quicker and do more. The real issue is, for those that know the situation between Mike D'Antoni and James Harden, Mike D'Antoni was basically terrified of James Harden because he knew that in order to keep his job and make sure that he stayed employed, James had to be happy. So in order for James to be happy, he had to cater to James Harden way too much, didn't really enjoy all the interactions with James because of the fact that there was a different way or a wrinkle to the way he wanted to play. But in order to be successful and be employed by the Rockets, it was James' way or the highway.
That makes sense. I mean, I guess to be fair, that is kind of the dynamic of the NBA now, is kind of catering to the superstars. I want you to play GM for us and kind of put a trade package together. Before we do that, let's pay some bills and give a word for our video sponsor at Fitz Roofing.
Well, we love the people at Fitz Roofing. They're dedicated to us, but they're more so dedicated to the people of Houston, Texas. That means if you need anything done with your roofing, from repairs to a whole new roof on your business or your house, all it takes is one phone call. It's 832-521-3001. You get a free no obligation inspection just by calling them. They're going to come to you and show you what they can do. Then they're going to go back on their merry way. You want them to come back? Just call them back. They're going to do great work with the best warranties and the best product in the business. It's Fitz Roofing, making a difference, one home at a time.
Joel, if you're Daryl Morey, what kind of package would you want from Philly to make this happen?
Well, obviously it starts with one or the other, Ben Simmons and or Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid's a guy that is kind of like the Lion in the Wizard of Oz. He's got all the talent, the tools, and he's the king of the jungle, but what kind of heart does he have? Because he's disappeared in big-time moments more than he's stepped up and played. Sound familiar? If you're Ben Simmons, like I said, he can't shoot the basketball, but he's got a world of talent, and I think with the Western Conference so loaded down, the Rockets realistically have to look at it as this window's closed. And for the next 3 or 4 years, the West is going to be a logjam. But if you get one of those young guys, maybe in the next 3 or 4 years, you can build around them to where in a couple of years, you're back in the mix as a championship caliber team, as opposed to older aging superstars like Russ and James, which basically probably have seen their best days. So I think the package starts with who you get in return, one of the two guys, whether it be Simmons or Embiid. And the trade that I've seen thrown out there is Harden and Eric Gordon for either Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid, and then Al Horford. Good news there is Eric Gordon's contract is way too long for way too many years at about $18 million a year on average. Al Horford you get for 1 year, I think, or maybe 2 left on it. You get out from under that. But he gives you a big man who can also space the floor and shoot the 3, which you are in desperate need of. Then if you also get Embiid in that package, you suddenly have gotten rid of small ball and have versatility and the ability to play numerous different ways with bigs that can still shoot the 3. So that works for both sides and makes a hell of a lot of sense. Because of that very factor alone, the deal probably won't happen. But if it did, that's where I'd start with. One of their 2 best players, and Al Horford, to me, works very well with Eric Gordon and James Harden going from here to there. And if you want to interchange some few pieces, there are some pieces on Philly that are decent, but because of contracts and all the big contracts the Rockets have, I think you still keep enough of your nucleus of role players together, and that deal still makes sense.
Before we started this video, as we were getting set up, you and I were just kind of bouncing around how both franchises do feel like they kind of need to hit the reset button, this would be a way in which they could both do that and both stay competitive. And in the case of Philly, I think you add James Harden and all of a sudden you're a contender in the East, because the East is a little softer than the West.
That's the biggest thing. James has to erase a lot of playoff memories. He's already established from an offensive performance standpoint, from a regular season perspective with an MVP trophy and runner-ups. He's done all he can do except for win in the playoffs. The only way to win in the playoffs is to get out of the West, because like LeBron did when he made his run in the East for those 8 straight years to the finals, the road was not very bumpy, and it was a pretty smooth sailing ride getting into the final series of the year. For James Harden to get into the East and know that with Toronto kind of on the downside and the top 2 teams, Boston and Miami, playing for it right now, Miami has a lot of contract issues after this season and guys they're going to have to try and re-sign. So that might be a tougher call for them to stay relevant in the top of the East. There's not as many teams. You're probably going to be a top seed. You're probably going to win some series. You're probably going to put up big numbers. For James Harden's legacy, which is all about James Harden in his mind, it really helps him to establish that legacy long term if he gets into the Eastern Conference. So I think it's a total win for the Sixers. And look, they, much like the Rockets, took their shot while the window was open with the 2 young guys and building around them. How the team that had Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris, J.J. Redick, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid didn't do more, I'll never know. Kind of like the Oklahoma City team that had Harden and Ibaka with KD and Russ. But you know what? At a certain point, you got to cut your losses and go, it's time to move on. If you're Philly and the Rockets, there are 2 teams that both could do worse than cutting their losses, making this move, and taking a shot a different way.
Well, speaking of cutting your losses, you and I did a video last week discussing what a James Harden trade could look like, and the response on ESPN's Facebook page was enormous. I don't want to get caught up in judging fan sentiment by an echo chamber, but I do want to get your opinion on what you think fan reception would be if the Rockets would deal Harden.
I don't think the Rockets fans have any problem with it. I think that they took a ride with the beard as long as they could. The frustrations level is much to that of what Bill O'Brien is on the football side of things. Look, they took a chance. They took a ride. They won some division titles. They did some things. But at the end of the day, the reality is this team isn't loaded for bear and going to win a title anytime soon. And James isn't the guy that's going to be the leader to take you to the promised land like they all thought. So with that thing, all those things being said, if you can flip him for a younger and possibly talented in a different way superstar that is on the rise with more years to build around as a Rockets fan, you like the alternative of that versus starting completely over, where if you start from scratch, you got a whole lot of big contracts to get off the books. You have no draft picks to say or choose from. So without money and without draft picks, how much better conceivably can you be next year, the year after, and the year after that? And the biggest thing too is if you just said, hey, the Rockets are going to get a new coach and they're going to stop playing small ball, so they're going to go get a big man with their mid-level exception, that which they do have. Well, then who's going to shoot around them? Because they still need shooters. They still have guys that are going to go elsewhere for more money. I just don't see there being a short-term solution. So long-term, the deal makes sense.
Joel, one last thing is there's another little interesting twist onto this, isn't there?
Yeah, there really is. There's rumors out there. The Sixers have been enamored with Daryl Morey for quite a while, too. And they could possibly move on from their general manager, Elton Brand. If that's the case, they've pursued Daryl in the past. They might want to pursue him again. Based on the Hong Kong tweet and the way that it got rocky between Tillman Fertitta and Daryl Morey, he may be looking for a fresh start as well. If you could get his contract off the books and you could somehow get him to Philly as well, whether he's teamed with Harden and D'Antoni or not, that would be the ultimate fresh start for the Rockets, because now Tillman doesn't have to worry about paying $8 million plus a year, whatever Daryl's contract is for how many more years he has left, all of Harden's money, and the money that he would have had to pay D'Antoni to re-up, and he can start fresh with an ownership group in which he believes he wants to do it his way. He hasn't been able to do it before. Now maybe he can, and now maybe you can bring in your guy for a general manager, your guy for head coach, and start building your team your way if you're Tillman Fertitta.